not going to read the whole thing out because it's a long document, but you could certainly look up the summary judgment from the trial of Lloyd Rayney, 2012. But I'm just going to read some of the things in it out. And by doing so, I hope that some people can come to a final understanding or realization about why I talk the way I do about things. It's got to be that there is justness in the world. Now, clearly, people having their life taken, having their safety destroyed, having people torn from their lives, this isn't just. But we as a society should want to know we can trust those who are investigating such crimes. We need to be able to trust the people that are reporting on the crimes, and we need to know that the law is upheld and our values are upheld, because every citizen has to have this. And just as it's so awful for somebody who is guilty to go free, an innocent person being imprisoned is heinous as well, and it does other things to people's lives than simply take some time, that moment by moment over the years of time that they may be imprisoned or going through trial. It strips them bare, and they don't have a strong foundation anymore to rebuild, and people lose everything. It ruins their life. It's not to say that the obvious things shouldn't be investigated in cases, and that investigators sometimes have to go hard, but they have to be held to the utmost standard. They have to be able to be under scrutiny, audited within a word of their life in an investigation. It does nobody any favors if, for example, because they believe so strongly, even if let's say somebody is guilty and they know it, but they just don't have the evidence, if they try to manipulate what they do have, they are depriving every single person in their community, in their country, of justness, of respect and freedom. It's just a fact. That's how I see it. I hate the injustice of damaged, disappeared, murdered people whose persecutors and perpetrators are never found or never brought to justice. It's nothing about that. It's not about me choosing who I think is guilty or innocent. It's about the process, and that it has gotten to, outcomes are gotten to in the just manner, because so many mistakes can be made. Human beings are so fallible. It's not to say that people shouldn't work on intuition, and God, there's so much discussion about confirmation bias and sort of, just so many factions at the moment. But, we still have to turn that same scrutiny on yourself. And are you judging others but not looking at yourself in the same manner? So some of the things said, looking beyond guilt or innocence and seeing the structure of the investigation. Just quickly, this is something really to do with Carl Cassidy, because he was one of the investigators that came in to the case, not in 2007, but in 2008, and investigated LACO. He since resigned from the force in 2014. It was said he undermined his colleagues, and indeed justice, because what he was doing was feeding a lover of his, a lawyer, information. He was letting her view interview videos and everything and justifying it by saying that a lawyer would have had to see it anyway. And he was part of the defamation trial that Lloyd Rayney won. He, of course, denies lying to enhance his evidence, but the judge put forth that he did. So it just undermines the entire case, all the work that everybody else is doing. And just to recap for you, the case brought against Rayney by the police was that Rayney killed Corryn at the home, hid her body when the girls were both asleep, dragged her body out after bringing the car back from wherever he hid her car, the Ford Fairmont, and then drove to Kings Park, and they estimated, it took him there at the site 1 hour to dig, and he took 1.5 hours to get home, and that he may have been home by 4 a.m. to get a little rest and to be there to wake his girls at 7:30 to go with them to go to wake Corryn, to find that she's not there. Dr. Reynolds, forensic investigator, tells Lynn Milne, who was the forensic pathologist who discovered that the third seed pod, not mentioned at first but suddenly coming up at trials, the third seed pod of the liquid amber tree didn't have anything from Kings Park in it, which it should have. And I'm not sure, but she may have been the forensic pathologist that discovered that, well, the pollens in Corryn's sinus cavity were only from Kings Park. Therefore, how the police were telling people Lloyd killed Corryn could not have been so, because they were alleging strongly that he killed Corryn at home, that he ambushed her at home, and that she would have had to have been dead to ensure that, well, she wasn't just going to be able to alert her daughters or anyone else as to what had happened to her before he got a chance to take her away, deciding to bury her in Kings Park. So, and Lloyd Rayney is now, in 2021, looking to double his defamation damages. He's bringing other defamation cases against professionals, law enforcement professionals. So the summary judgment, or the judgment summary, it's inappropriate to reprehensible. The burden of proof lies with the state. No burden upon the accused. I'm just obviously paraphrasing. There's no burden upon the accused. There's not enough to show suspicion of guilt, or even it's not enough to show suspicion of guilt, or even to show he probably is guilty. Obviously, the state must exclude the possibility that someone else, other than the accused, caused the death of the deceased, and also that the deceased did not die of natural causes. During the trial, it emerged that the deceased suffered coronary artery disease. She was susceptible to suffering from a cardiac event which could have rendered her unconscious or killed her. However, the totality of evidence satisfied me this didn't happen. So the police case then was that they alleged that Corryn Rayney was attacked between Bentley Community Hall and Kings Park. It was a violent assault. It rendered her unconscious, but not life-threatening. Unconscious, not killed. The perpetrator has decided to bury her. Regarding to the presence of pollen from Kings Park and no other locality, Corryn's last breaths were taken in the immediate vicinity of the gravesite. Either that or she was buried alive. I think it was decided that she probably wasn't alive. It's also about the pollen. It's not just that she might have been alive there for 5 minutes. It's the last 45 minutes alive of life that she could tell was in Corryn's sinus cavity. The state relied on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence can be good, bad, or indifferent, like direct evidence can be good, bad, or indifferent. Guilt must be the only rational inference. Guilt must be the only rational inference. Drawing inference from proven facts is different from speculation. There's no room in criminal court for speculation or speculative theories. Fact must support drawn inferences. It would be entirely inappropriate to start with presumption of guilt and consider whether evidence is consistent with that view. Adopted in everyday life, sure, but must be avoided in criminal court. And Lloyd chose his right not to give evidence. Evidence showing the accused engaged in indiscreditable conduct was not admitted to show that the accused is of bad character. The fact that he engaged in discreditable conduct and could be viewed as a person of bad character cannot be used to reason he's the type of person to kill his wife, or that by reason of bad character is likely to have killed her. Such reasoning is unfair and it's prohibited. You know, and I guess talk about Lloyd's character, it would involve his gambling, and the gambling totaled between 1997 and 2007, $115,000. So over 10 years, I guess it was $20,000, $30,000 some years, right? Lloyd's income had been $490,000 in the year before, leading up to Corryn's murder, and about $420,000 the year before that. He'd worked hard to develop that level of income stream, and there was no reason why he shouldn't maintain that level of income stream or increase it. And now he's either had zero income stream, or there's been years now where he's worked for $80,000, and out of this amount, obviously is still trying to conduct his legal defense. But the bad character of Lloyd, what the judge is saying, you can't just decide because you dislike people who act in a certain manner. It doesn't entitle you to make leaps that this is a bad person who has committed murder. And even if Lloyd did commit Corryn's murder, the evidence wasn't available where he could be found guilty and convicted, which I know is horrible. He goes on to mention that Lloyd, and Corryn, with their separation, Lloyd's bed was set up in the study, that something hanging over his head were those threats from Corryn to expose his conduct, to damage his reputation. And of course his reputation was incredibly important to Lloyd, and the judge mentions that by mid-July 2007, so this is literally 3 or so weeks prior to Corryn's murder, Lloyd had set up surveillance. So he was making, not only was he using a dictaphone to record conversations with Corryn in person with her, he was tapping her phones, and then, this is back in the day, he was obtaining the information on CD, and to this date those have never been presented to court. Lloyd either has hidden them or he had them destroyed. Lloyd had provided bank statements to his solicitor in preparation for the divorce. He was moving ahead with doing that sort of thing that Corryn wanted him to do, but on the date of August the 7th, he didn't have the information there that night that Corryn was going to want to discuss. And the judge mentions that he had a fear of exposure and did not have, these financial records available for Corryn that night. And this was one of the motives that police were trying to use, was the fact that Corryn was trying to subpoena his financial records. And maybe Lloyd was trying to protect who he knows and who he was doing binny with and how he was doing the business. But police was trying to state this was part of the motive that they brought forth. They were stating that this was part of the motive for Lloyd to decide to murder Corryn. But the judge is saying, well, we can see that Lloyd has shown he's accepted that he has to do this. He's made plans to release funds and understood that he had to move out of the family home. The judge goes on to say there's no suggestion Lloyd was ever threatening or violent. When the state's evidence was properly analysed, the totality does not support state contention that conduct was indicative that he killed his wife. Much of it tends, in fact, to undermine the state's position, because what the state had done, and one of the persons doing so was Casserly, was just blowing up the way that they presented the evidence. So And the judge just goes through and breaks it down and says, well, this is meaningless. This isn't evidence. This is, it's theatre, or it's, it's just creative writing and that sort of thing. So he wasn't very impressed with the way that the evidence was, what the state was saying was evidence, was presented. And it just undermined their case, and they couldn't prove also that they had followed enough of the other leads satisfactorily to rule them out. And that's part of the reasonable doubt, and that was a big failure of the case as well. And maybe if they'd done that, and maybe if people could think, wow, well, Lacko, it's pretty strange that he had the map of the Supreme Court where Corryn lives, and it's got a map of Kings Park. I mean, he did work there. But what if they had eventually discovered footage of Lacko being entirely somewhere else? Corryn arrived home 9:45 or earlier. Caitlin was in bed by 11:30 and probably asleep by 10, and the judge actually dismissed Caitlin's later assertion that, well, maybe I was in bed later than that. But if Caitlin was in bed by 11:30 and that's accepted, and if that's true, then the scream heard by a resident in the building overlooking Kings Park, the scream was heard at 11 o'clock. If Caitlin was up for another, it stated she was dropped home by 10:40, between 10:40 and 11, and in bed by 11:30. So how was Lloyd physically at Kings Park if that scream was Corryn, and the time would probably fit that it was Corryn? So, it's just important to, cases get people, of course, so emotional. Someone's missing, someone's life is lost, someone has been harmed, someone's entire family has been destroyed, and people carry so much conviction. But this is why investigations must be carried out. It's to such a high standard, and I know, not everyone is held to utter perfection in their job, but law and order is something, it should be a privilege. It's a privilege to protect and serve, and it's a huge responsibility, and law enforcement should be supported with funding and training and resources, and citizens should be supported with being able to trust law enforcement, have faith in law enforcement, and not to feel fear and mistrust. And anyway, I think you get what I mean. Be in pursuit of truth. That's all. That's all anyone needs to be in pursuit of, is truth. truth might be shocking, or it might not be what you want it to be. It could be worse than you ever imagined. You know, and the WA police force, were they looking for truth, or were they looking for a conviction of someone that they believed called Corryn? That, you know, you feel it in your waters. You just have such conviction. You just know something, right? Okay. Well, you're human. They're fallible too. They're human, and it's not always right, and it's so often proven not to be right. You know, and then you've got the situations where, you know, you've got the WM3 who are now apparently not guilty. And we're just constantly flip-flopping, being manipulated by people's ideas and by false, you know, just by very persuasive arguments. And it's, yeah, trust is just such a huge thing here. Who do you trust? How do you trust people's motives? How do you trust law enforcement's motives? How do you trust media motives? Media don't seem to just report the news anymore, you know. Yeah, there's always only one truth when it really comes down to it. Anyway, so I guess, I mean, I'm just saying about the Morphew case, because, you know, this is why I've been talking about Corryn Rayney and her murder and Lloyd Rayney's trials and everything, is because some of the similar things are happening in the Morphew case. Now, if Barry Morphew is guilty, these failings are going to allow a guilty person possibly to get away with murder. If some things were done and other things weren't presented in a certain way, then at least you're getting a truer picture. So clear, I mean, you know, obviously, clearly, what needs to happen is Suzanne needs to be found. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Did it help in the case of Corryn Rayney that she was found? Yeah, I'm just not qualified to say. All right. Thanks for listening again, and I'll speak to you later, but probably not on this matter again. Okay, bye.